All right, so let's get rolling here. Our first speaker is Tony Higgins. Tony is the Chief Technology Officer for Blueprint. Tony, welcome, Tony. Great to have you here. Tony has spent 35 years in a range of technology roles, from running services organization to building systems and products to organizational transformation. His presentation today is titled From Pilot to Enterprise Scale RPA, How to Amplify and Accelerate the Business Value of RPA to Build a Thriving Enterprise. Welcome, Tony. Really looking forward to it.
Great. Thank you very much, Jose, and appreciate it. And thank you all for joining today. Hope you find this presentation valuable for you. So what I'm going to do in the 30 minutes I have, or 35, is briefly just introduce myself a little more and the company I work for, give you an overview of what I'm going to run through today, and then dive right into it. And really the basis for my presentation is a sort of stereotypical RPA evolution, what we have seen on the ground for real, and how companies tend to evolve and the patterns that we're seeing, and then the realizations that they have along the way, lessons learned, if you will. And then transition into also how we've seen people solve some of those challenges they bumped into, or some speed bumps, if you will. Summarize, and then we'll do a Q&A, as Jose had said. So once again, I hope this will be of value to you. Let me just dismiss my little dashboard, and we'll jump into it. So real quick, Blueprint, the company. So just allow me to briefly introduce the company I work for, so you better know who's speaking to you today. Blueprint's been around for around a decade. We've always been focused on analyzing business needs or opportunities, defining solutions for them, and then driving them into implementation cycles. So we are a product company. We do this on a large scale for larger enterprises globally. And by that, I mean very large initiatives with lots of interrelated parts, or conversely, lots and lots of smaller initiatives with lots of cross dependencies that need to maintain alignment with some overall business strategy, and then of course everything in between. Our platform's used for process automation, optimization, transformation work, and that includes RPA, but not limited to that. And that of course is the focus of today's session. As for me, thank you, Jose, for the intro. Real quick, my early days developing a variety of actually military systems for about 12, 15 years, and then I moved to large-scale commercial IT systems development. After that, shifted into the product and services space, primarily focused on tools and technology for technology development and transformation. Doing all this over 35 years in the tech space now, and currently I'm the CTO of Blueprint, so I head up our product team from vision right through to delivery and success into our customer base. So the presentation today, again, is about what we've seen, what we're now seeing in the marketplace, primarily about our customers. I mean, they're the ones we spend most of our time with, obviously, and I can hopefully relate what they've gone through. These are just some of them, just to give you a sense by industry, and it's about what's worked and what hasn't worked. So it's not specific to any industry, although the industries we mostly serve are like financial services, banking, insurance, pharmaceuticals, tend to be the more regulated industries. They have a lot more constraints they need to deal with. But as you can see, we also have customers in hospitality, transportation, manufacturing. So it's pretty horizontally applicable, if you want to use that term. Real quick, these are the results of a survey we conducted during an automation event last December with companies like the ones you just saw in attendance. From this survey, the majority of customers, if you look, I mean, they had bots that numbered less than 10, which a lot of folks on that event, I recall, was kind of eye-opening. So what I want to do right out of the gate is just ask you folks, how many bots has your organization actually implemented and has in operation, to your knowledge, roughly speaking? So Jose, are you able to open that poll?
The poll is live, so please go ahead
great.
and take your votes.
Yeah, I can't see it, so so that's great. So thank you. Yeah, and this one, of course, shouldn't take too long. Just a single choice, just another 10 seconds or so. Let more people respond.
Terrific. We have almost everybody
All right. Why don't we
closing their votes right now.
okay, I'll let you close it off when you feel.
We'll give you another 10 seconds, take your vote, and we'll close the poll. Tony, are you able to see the poll results?
I cannot. So maybe you can just relate
all right,
quickly.
I'll relate them to you, Tony. So we had 54% of the respondents that were said that there were none implemented.
Wow. Okay.
And then we had 20% that said we had 1 to 5 bots, 4% 6 to 10, 13% 11 to 50, and 11% had over 50. So
Wow.
more than half had none, and then 20%,
Right.
4%, 13, and 11%.
Wow. Yeah. So I mean, obviously not exact from the last poll we've taken, but kind of in line. Basically giving you a sense of, how mature is this space at the moment, and a sense of the challenges that people are facing trying to actually implement and advance this. And this is very much in keeping, again, with what we've seen. So once again, hopefully the presentation I go through today will be relatable to a lot of folks. So the poll's down, Jose?
Yes, it is. We can see your
Okay,
screen and
great.
presentation.
Wonderful, thanks. Okay, so after working with many of these companies, again, whose names you saw earlier, we have distinct patterns when it comes to their adoption and evolution over time of RPA. And of course, we hope we can learn from their experiences. So the way we very typically see things is right at the beginning. Somebody somewhere in the organization was the catalyst and may have started themselves or with a small group to explore process automation. And we've seen it almost equally on the business side or the IT side, to be honest. And for many, they started a few years ago. And inevitably back then, I mean, it was probably Blue Prism because they were one of the only players in town. But of course, today, there's a much broader set of vendors to choose from. These individuals would jump in, tremendous optimism and excitement, of course. It's something new. And they knew themselves, or through discussion discovers, processes that looked like they'd be very amenable to be automated. They felt they knew it well with a few conversations, and then their focus very quickly, we know, turned to, the technology for implementation because they hadn't done it before. So after learning the technology, what we've witnessed and many times through conversation, the first thing that hits them is, in spite of all the glowing articles and marketing literature, you actually do need a degree of technical skill to make a meaningful automation. There's an investment you need to make. So the promise of just anybody randomly sitting at a keyboard and doing this isn't exactly correct. And after getting through those initial learning hurdles for the technology, let's say they've made an automation, it actually functions, does what they hoped it would do. Again, sense of excitement and pride in what they've built. And they can, of course, imagine the possibilities. Gosh, what if we had hundreds or thousands of these automating giant swaths of the company's operations? Then came a range of reality checks as they went down the road of showing it back to the stakeholders. And this is when the exceptions start to come out and surface. Once people start to see things, they can think of all the different exceptions. So things that happen only in certain situations that they missed when automating, because everybody thinks happy path first. There's first one, then another one comes. And after making these changes, again, we assume we have it nailed. But then they discovered some users performing the same task, but doing it a little differently in alternative ways. So of course, this required some exploration as to, why are different people doing it differently, the same work? Is one right and the other wrong? Is one better? Are they just different? Then need to look at it and say, at conversations at a higher level, why are we even doing this process? Is there a better way entirely? Should we be in a realm of thinking transformation? And then there was the discovery that the process was making some decisions to comply with, presumably, with some business rules or policies, So the variations happening with different people doing it differently, it really warranted double checking. If we're going to automate this, we better make sure we understand what those rules or policies are, because we're going to be actually embedding them into code, essentially into a bot. So that causes them to go back to the actual rules or policies to see what they really said to make sure that we're complying. And at some point, all of this became enough work and enough detail that they had to capture it in just about every single case. They made a document, and the label more often than not was PDD, sometimes BRD we've seen, or BDD, different names, but in essence it's the same thing. It's basically we need a vehicle or a package to capture all of this information so it's not lost. So in summary, this first level of reality check, it all turned out to be a little more work than we anticipated when we first got into this. And even after all those conversations, they had a sinking feeling they didn't get everything. So then came the conversations. Those were the stakeholders or business folks. Now we have a conversation with some of the more technical folks, because this is going to get deployed. It's going to be operating. And things got even more involved. So they, in many cases, were trying to figure out how all this RPA stuff is going to fit into their world. At the same time, the first thing that surfaced was scrutiny about the data being accessed. That's the first thing everybody thinks about, and being pushed into systems. Is any of it sensitive? To what degree? How or where is it being stored or transferred? We need to authenticate. So, credentials, how are they going to be handled where single sign-on doesn't apply? How's it going to be triggered or scheduled? A whole range of technical errors could, of course, happen. What are we going to do in each and every case? So in the end, yet another document was created to capture all of this information. This was often had a label of SDD, or we saw people put this more technical information in the original and just had one document regardless. And then even more documents start to pop out, ODIs, PDIs, more technical implementation information. And again, where there's volume of information, we need to keep it somewhere. People turn to documents traditionally. So armed with this information now, and take a breath, we plow ahead to get a functioning process built. Now focus on working out the kinks. So demonstration scheduled. Again, we bring in the broader audience, business people, IT people, to see, introduce them to the new digital coworker, if you will. Having learned a great deal with eyes wide, now hopefully more wide open, proudly demo the bot. But as the business people want to be sure all the possibilities are covered, of course, they come with another list, a list that nobody's ever seen before. And comments like, well, you never told us that, and responses like, well, sorry, we thought of it afterwards, but regardless, this can't go out until we know this is handled. And that's just very classic. So, and then they think of a couple of cases weren't even on their list during the session. So long story short, very quickly, we realize we have need for a validation step that's more formal, yet another document. Then gradually, one by one, more objections start to come out. Things like more on the operations side, because people are starting to think of that. What about business continuity, disaster recovery, reporting, logging? What about the responsibilities for running this and escalating things? And what's the change process? We know things are going to change. In fact, we already know there's a regulatory change coming that's going to have an impact on this. All of this starts to add up, and we see even more documents. So let's fast forward a year. Let's say we have a handful of bots developed in production. We have established roles. Things seem to be functioning okay, and we've settled down and got a degree of stability. But the realizations in summary that we've had, if we just boil it up, is that there's a lot more technical skill required than we first imagined. And by that, I mean, of course, we need to learn the tools. We wouldn't dream of doing this in retrospect without training, of course. And there's a range of proficiency levels. Those with more technical inclination seem to ramp faster and can do more elaborate things with the automation. There's more documentation. I think we made that point than we imagined there would be. There's more process and people involved than we initially thought. And one of the bigger ones is maintenance and changes is way more burdensome than ever imagined. What they're realizing is they're now in the software business, right? So after establishing a foothold, that's almost what I'd call phase one of what we see with these organizations as they then sail into even more headwinds. And some of these very stereotypical ones are the success of actually deploying digital workers or bots at the beginning and being able to measure and demonstrate improvement, of course, that's going to catch the attention of senior levels. So like any new technology, RPA goes through a hype cycle. Senior staff are certainly not immune to this. It sometimes feels like, they feel there's a default assumption you can just hit a big repeat button and get similar gains and just keep hitting it to get scale. So there's expectations, and you could say unreal, that and accompanying pressures, of course, that we need to scale this initial success and do it quickly. So having learned the lessons mentioned previously, these people that are doing the automation, imagining what it would be like now to try to scale all this with the processes and all these things they've learned, it kind of makes you shiver. Of course, you have to now explain and educate to others why this isn't necessarily as easy as it looks. We also have more people stepping up, more people who feel they have a say or genuinely should have a say. It's broadening out to more and broader processes, means bringing in new people and stakeholders that weren't there initially. From office functions, lines of business where the process lived, but you also have to automate more of the business with other stakeholders now needing to have a say, like security, legal, marketing, compliance, risk, and the list goes on. So those are a couple of things. Another one we learned is evolving roles and organizational needs. So roles tend to evolve as these pressures grow. We've seen an equal measure where RPA started within the business with a few innovative people wanting to try automation, and then it grew, and we've seen it be kind of pushed into IT. We've seen it start in IT and largely remain there. So we've seen several patterns, but the one we most see is islands of automation popping up, each learning on their own with different approaches and sometimes even different tools. And now in our customers, what we're seeing is kind of an evolution, a trend towards centralization, which I guess shouldn't be surprising due to a number of factors: increasing need for security and compliance, of course, reconciling cost, but also the assumption that this is how you scale. Another thing we're seeing is agile pressure. So automation initiatives tend to start out in a very waterfall project type, but now we're seeing pressure or desire to shift to more agile product approaches. Some see it as welcomed, others see it as an imposition, but regardless, I'm going to speak a lot more on this shortly. Another thing that we see is discovery of more processes to automate becomes a challenge. I mean, in the early days, of course, we pick all the low-hanging fruit, those for which it was painfully obvious automation could deliver benefit and they were well suited, but now those are gone. So we need to hunt for processes which may not look like they'll return as great and probably are more complicated and harder to automate. So delivering on these expectations become harder. And when they're harder to automate, it often translates into harder to maintain. So we're just snowplowing, challenges down, further down in the cycle as well. And lastly, like I said, the ever-growing documents. I mean, it results in even more information, and that translates into more sections of documents or more documents on the whole, more information to be analyzed, recorded, considered when things change. So now what I'm going to do is transition to explain how we've seen companies help kind of address these issues and get around them or get ahead of it. And with limited time, I'm just going to focus on these bottom four. So before we go into that, let me just take one more quick poll, and Jose, you may bring it up. It's basically, what are the biggest challenges that you have faced with RPA's introduction and evolution?
So the poll has been launched. Please go ahead and take your, select the options that apply. The first option is funding or budget for RPA, identifying RPA opportunities, prioritizing RPA opportunities, organizational and role changes to support RPA, and maintenance overhead. Go ahead and start taking the polls. We're collecting the responses right now. Very good.
And I believe, Jose, this is a multiple choice, and so you can pick like the top three if you like.
Yes, it looks like you can. So
good.
We have about 50% voted at this point, and we'll give you another 10 seconds here and we'll close the poll. Excellent. Most of you have voted already. So I will close the poll and launch.
Again, I can't see. So
I'll
I'll have to
relate
ask
to
you
you, Tony.
maybe the top three. Just curious.
The very top one, the biggest challenge
Mhm.
facing with RPA was organization and role changes to support RPA. So that
Wow.
org structure to support the RPA implementation. The second one, that was 43%. The second one
Mhm.
was 41% on identifying RPA opportunities, the right ones to work on. And then the third one was the funding or budget for RPA.
Wow, fascinating. Okay. Yeah, and again, not misaligned with what we're seeing out there as well. And of course, this is not the only list, right? There's others, but okay, very aligned with what we're seeing. So thank you all for that. So real quick, let me go through these. So evolving roles in organization, of course, this just on itself, this was your number one. I mean, it could be a whole presentation under itself, obviously, but as mentioned, the most common things we've witnessed is RPA starting small area, dispersing into what we'd call islands of automation, not tightly connected, if at all, with automation specialists, let's say, being parachuted into business units, and then evolving eventually to more of a consolidation center of excellence notion. I'm not going to say that's the best trajectory. I'm just saying that's what we see most of the time. So where things need to start, in our opinion, is knowledge, of course. So there's the kind of the two ends of the spectrum are centralized or a federated approach to organization and governance. So Gartner has a great chart describing these. It's on the screen now. To help determine which is the best for where you are in your life cycle. So regulatory compliance, clearly in a centralized model, that's going to, allow you to apply more rigor to that and make it easier to do. Delivery at speed. In a federated model, people are more autonomous, out on their own, closer to the action, if you will, and are able in general to deliver faster. If you have a low appetite or risk, again, you want a centralized kind of control outward model. Operational model, traditional shared service is of course beautifully suited to more of a centralized governance model, whereas fusion teams, multidisciplinary people involved, tend to be, again, more autonomous automated units. Delivery maturity, just like application development's moving from project to product, it's considered product as a more mature approach, and that tends to be found more in the federated. And if we're just starting out, as I said, the trend we're seeing is more people pulling back and consolidating and centralizing, and that's, again, stereotypical of just starting out. And then citizen developer, as the skills grow, they can become more autonomous, injected into those fusion teams, and be able to do it on their own. So again, these are just ways to double click on those two spectrums. Of course, there's everything in between. Again, you can have different combinations of these, but those are a couple things to think about. In terms of roles, I think it's important to consider them in layers like strategic, tactical, operational, regardless of whether it's central or federated. So for example, at a strategic level, you want roles that focus on the overall vision for process improvement, or at least for RPA. But I'd suggest even more broadly, since RPA isn't the answer to everything ultimately. So it absolutely needs to have a business focus and a mindset. Titles vary dramatically, but these are some of the typical ones we see. At the tactical level, the focus needs to be on driving the desired business outcomes to fulfill that strategy. So here you're going to find roles like those listed here. Again, the titles vary, but a couple here to note are the automation architect and the navigator. So the architect's really a horizontal or matrixed function, especially in the federated model, where they reconcile redundancies across the different groups and come up with common solutions to common problems. It's really what architecture is: standardization, reuse, and so on. Automation navigator, that's a role that Gartner is promoting, and is supposed to be a specialist in finding or discovering the best opportunities for automation. I have to admit, I've never seen anybody with this title or role. What I've typically seen is it's a combination of process owners, SMEs, and BAs doing that work. And then at the operational level, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. The practitioners who build and operate the automations and ensure they function. So again, regardless of the organizational structure, centralized, federated, and titles are going to vary, but these are the kinds of roles that we have seen in place. And the one thing that we see most often in successful orgs is certainly putting in place these three levels. To not do this means Again, the upper level's missing, mean you're kind of rudderless, and the bottom level, of course, is obvious. We're not going to get many effective automations built. So the next thing I want to look at is applying Agile principles quickly. So Agile's evolved as a way to improve the situation of delivering complex custom software. So I'm not going to cover all the Agile principles. There's actually 12 of them, but instead I want to focus on one in particular, and that's the ability to break work down into individually demonstrable or demonstratable pieces. If you can't do that, you can't do Agile, full stop. So you define, design, build one small piece at a time. You're able to demonstrate it. You do it in a rigid time box fashion, like sprints, let's say. And in this way, within a predictable time frame, you can see the results of your work as you go. So it enables, and by that I mean everybody can see the results. So it enables you to spot really early if things are heading in a wrong direction. It also will let you accommodate changes more easily because they can come in on any of the sprint cycles. So there's lots of goodness associated with it. Now in RPA, we've seen it be applied, this be applied a couple of ways in terms of splitting up work. One that I'd call scenario-based and the other I'd call function-based. So with scenario-based, you build the happy path, and that's basically a story. Or if it's a lot more work, you can have it as a higher level entity called an epic. But this is our first piece of work we're going to try to tackle. And then each alternate path is done as separate work items. Okay, so this lets us show how it works, and we can grow it, but we grow it by the different full cycle paths. So that's one way, what we call scenario based. Another way we've seen it done is functional breakdown. So this allows multiple specialists to work together to create the scenarios. Maybe I have one or two people really good at the AI components. So they really focus on those functional aspects, and our coworkers or colleagues work on some of the other components, just for example. So again, each has pluses, minuses, not necessarily, there's no right answer, depends on your situation, but there are options and alternatives like I showed. Now, in terms of technology or tooling to aid this process, this diagram you see here is actually a shot from our product Blueprint. And some of the technology that can be applied is we can take this diagram and automatically translate it to user stories. So for example, if I take this portion of the process, this is a story. So this is one of many stories generated for that process end to end. So that's one of the beauties of technology. We can all work together collaboratively, imagine what the process should be, and then literally hit a button and we can translate it into a work item backlog that RPA developers can execute on if we're using Agile principles. And by the way, these stories would then be transferred over to Jira or similar tools to facilitate, that development cycle. The other one, discovering processes to automate. In terms of discovering processes to automate, you need a couple of things. You need to know, or a few things rather, you need to know what the processes are and whether they're suited to be automated. Not all are. Having metrics, because that's the only way we can baseline. So at the end of the day, we can measure, have we had an improvement? And hopefully all the alternatives as well, like I mentioned earlier. So there's technology existing that can help with this as well. One of our technology partners, there's other tools out there, but one of them is Fortress IQ. So just to pick as an example, they're able to continuously record the work being done on employee desktops, supply data analytics to surface and expose how people are doing their work. In other words, the processes they're doing. So there's really good things about this. I mean, it records work at a very detailed level, like mouse clicks and keystrokes. We get screenshots and every single action, so we can see precisely what it looked like. And because we're recording many workers, we see all those variations and alternatives for how people are doing the same piece of work, just differently. So we get the variations. And lastly, we get the metrics. How long does it take to do the work and how frequently is it done? So it tends to be way more comprehensive than you'd ever get going around manually, doing spot interviews and things like that. It's also very unbiased because we're recording actual data, like actually what happened. These tools are obvious for use in RPA, since RPA is about having digital workers take on the mundane tasks humans are doing, but mining tools are another source of current state process information. That's also valuable if you're looking to broaden automation, certainly beyond RPA as well. So what mining tools do, they record the event logs of the enterprise applications. So while the data here is more coarse, mining tools, they're able to capture activity that does not involve the human interface. So in a sense, the mining tool doesn't really care who's at the keyboards or even if there is a keyboard. In other words, it can capture activity originating from external facing customers who you've, exposed a UI to, as well as internal workers. Or even system to system interactions can be logged that don't even manifest themselves on a user interface anywhere. So it's complementary, I would say, to the task mining tools. So the discovery or task mining technologies expose detailed tasks. The mining tools expose broader processes in which those tasks take place. But even these together can't provide the complete picture. While they do a good job at capturing what actually happened, they can't tell you what should have happened or why things happened. For example, there may be steps we do in a process purely to comply with regulatory obligations, but these tools can't tell you that. There could be countless other reasons things are done, like standards, policies, rules, or even contractual agreements that we have with customers or vendors. So these whys are very important. If you don't comply with them, there could be material implications, but they need to be known as well, and they together constitute the current state, how things are done today and why they're being done. So this is one sorry, I'm going to transition now to dealing with document overload, but it marries up with the last one. It's one example of the last problem I want to talk about, which is the doc overload. So ultimately what we're trying to do is develop, robots using any one of the platforms available. I just spoke about the different technologies to expose the current state, task mining, process mining. If we gather up all those relevant rules, policies, regulations, agreements, etc., then we'd have a pretty solid representation of current state from which to design the new process. Now, as I showed earlier, what generally happens today, and indeed is promoted by pretty much all the RPA vendors, is to produce documents, PDDs, SDDs, and there's lots of templates available for them. But there is technology. I'm going to show mine up there, obviously. So in essence, what this is doing is pulling people out of those document containers, instead digitize and manage that information in a platform. So the value here is each piece of information managed independently, versioned, discussed, elaborated. Some call it digitizing the RPA document set, can all literally be done for RPA development, but also beyond, and all the documents in it, like PDDs, SDDs, UATs, and certainly all the change requests as well. So it's pulling it out of documents, putting it in a platform that can manage it. People can come in, even if they're disparate or distributed, and collaborate in these online platforms with inline discussions, reviews, sign-offs, and so on. And if you actually need a document, they can be generated automatically. So looking at all the pieces I've introduced to solve these problems, it kind of looks like this. So this is the type of infrastructure. It exists today in different technologies to focus on the best opportunities for automation, clearly define them, taking into account all those constraints like regulations and controls and rules, etc. And it actually is preventing many of the barriers that today is holding back organizations from scaling their RPA initiatives. So that's what I wanted to show you today. I just got a couple of seconds to summarize. How to organize roles for scale was one of the fundamental questions. Somewhat of a role change, obviously, since hopefully organizations are shifting to a more continuous improvement regimen. The COE model tends to be the right approach as you move along those tracks, but I think eventually everybody's going to end up with a federated model. Leveraging Agile, there's different ways you can slice and dice it as I presented, but Agile principles just make sense in the long run. And it represents a more mature practice, very aligned with product delivery. And I think, again, everyone's going to get there eventually. Reducing document overhead. I mean, there's technologies like ours that exist today. This is just an easy win, in my opinion. And I'm seeing personally our customers benefit from that, breaking through the scaling barriers because of it. Finding automation opportunities. Again, there's tremendous energy around the new technologies for process and task mining. It's evolving very rapidly. Analytics vendors are coming into the space, even BPM vendors, even the RPA vendors. So there's a lot of pent-up demand, as our survey showed, and a lot of fascinating technology that's really helping to solve that problem. And then all of this, in my opinion, really needs to position you for more broad automation beyond RPA, because there is certainly life beyond RPA with lots of other approaches as organizations get more mature. So that's what I wanted to show you today. Be happy to pass it to Jose to facilitate questions.
Tony, terrific. What a great presentation. Thank you very much for that. And you can go ahead, Tony, and yeah, turn off your screen so that we can see you full on. There were lots of questions that came on during your presentation, and thank you everybody, thank you the audience for that, and thank you Aman, who also came in as a co-organizer and provided a lot of great answers in real time. But I'm gonna start with a question, one of the questions that touches on what you talked about last, which has to do with the typical business processes that are considered for automation. You have such a great experience across so many different industries now on what you see being automated most often. But the question is really about what framework or approach do you use when you go into an organization and you're trying to identify what will create the most value in the shortest time and simplest means through an RPA implementation? What is your thought process? How do you address that with a new client?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing when trying to identify them, everything, you have to get very clinical. Everything boils down to the numbers at the end of the day. You know, why are we doing this, right? It isn't a hobby. Hopefully it can be fun, but that's not the primary objective, right? We need to make material business improvement, right? So it all comes down to business value. That tends to often be, you know, cost, revenue, risk, et cetera, but not always. There's more things businesses value than just, you know, straight up ROI, depending. But anyway, you really, really need to anchor it in that. So what is the business value that we're trying to drive? And then go back and how are these processes contributing to that? And it might just be on the cost side of the equation, which everyone kind of runs to first. Oh my gosh, look at the cost this could save. But again, it may not be. It may open the doors to new opportunities as well, right? Shortening supply chains and all sorts of different transformational objectives. But cost, again, tends to be the first one. It's the easiest one to communicate. But no matter what it is, you got to have the metrics. You have to baseline it, which honestly is why I'm so excited about those discovery technologies. We don't make or sell a discovery technology, but just looking at that and judging from the poll, that to me is you need objective data, right, about how is work being done now. Only then, with that stake in the ground, can I assess what the improvement's going to be. So that's just candidates for, you know, big returns or significant returns or delivery of value. The other lens you have to put on it is how amenable is this to be automated, right? So for example, I don't know, maybe my cost of sale is, I'm a product company, maybe cost of sales is really high. Boy, these enterprise sales reps really cost a lot. Gee, what if I could replace them with a robot? That's probably one of the most human activities you're ever going to find, right? With building relationships, you can't. It's not going to happen. It's just not suited to be automated. So there's those two lenses or perspectives, right? What is the, you know, what's the business value of doing this? How hard is it to do it? Put those together. And then the last lens I'd put on it, because we're dealing with large enterprises, that risk equation. This may be very risky. I may be dealing with lots of customer data. There may be huge privacy issues. If there's a breach, oh my gosh, I can't even imagine. I mean, literally has put companies out of business, right? So what is the risk around this? Or heaven forbid, we're in an industry that's talking about safety critical systems, right? So there can be huge risks as well. That's largely industry dependent, but we deal with those industries as well. So it's kind of those three lenses: business value, how amenable is it to be automated? Do I have the technology today, or am I just going to waste a month only to find, you know, maybe a year from now we could do it? And then the risk side. So those are really the lenses that I put on.
Very good. One of the other questions that came on had to do with best practices related to collaborating with Lean Six Sigma teams, and if you think about continuous improvement teams and organizations, I'm not sure with if your engagements, what proportion of those organizations have a robust continuous improvement program already in place? Talk a little bit about if there is an interface between what you do with those continuous improvement teams, or if they tend to work kind of the question hints at his experience, the person who posed the question, on this being often disconnected. And I wonder about your experience on working with continuous improvement teams that may already take place in the organizations you work with.
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly, everybody has the right attitude, the right objectives. They want to do the good thing. They want to have the textbook continuous improvement regimen in place, and we all have the vision, right? But it's really how to get there. And I fall back on really basic principles. And I know, you can call me biased. I work at a product company. I'm all about technology, but I'm more about customer success, and that always involves those classic 3 pillars, right, of people, process, and technology. And we're talking about an evolution and maturing an organization. You have to mature those 3 dimensions. And sometimes, one of them gets ahead of the other and the other has to catch up. So I think in terms of process and standard and theory and philosophy, I mean, we have Six Sigma, we have others as well. I think that's, very laudable and makes sense, and a lot of thought went into it. We have lots of validation. That's great. People, from the poll, we need to have an organizational structure. Is it central, federate, whatever? That has to catch up. Honestly, in this area, I do think the technology had been behind. I don't think availability of technology has been behind, but I think implementation of technology in a lot of large organizations, they just, it tends to be the mass majority. They're a little, slow to adopt versus some of the very small digital companies, if you want to call it that, which are now becoming very big digital companies. And they're doing that because they have speed, because they have that technological foundation. So I think that's the leg of the stool that does need to be brought up. And it's kind of, I won't go back, but it's kind of that last picture I painted today, where we have discovery. Finally, we have wonderful technology to really expose and turn the light bulb on so I can see what my people are doing for work. I have a platform, like ours, which can take that and all this complex information, draw the relationship so I can see, align it with strategy, define a solution, then go to RPA. Or quite honestly, I alluded to it, our platform drives more than RPA. There is more, but RPA is one. And that makes the new current state. Then I apply these technologies again to measure it. How did we do? There's your loop. So the technology exists today. You can automate a continuous improvement regimen, then layer on Six Sigma, then have your roles, hopefully evolving to federated. Now I have a machine. So we're seeing customers really, accelerating toward what I just described. I've yet to find one that's, a perfect example of it, but they're all moving very quickly. And looking forward to pretty soon, we're going to have some great case studies.
Very good, very good. There's a question here from Jonathan, Tony, that he wants you to talk a little bit more about the cultural aspects of implementing RPA and the people side of it, all the way from, maybe fear of job loss by implementation of RPA to just cultural adaptation to a new way of working, a new way of thinking, a new way of using technology. Really, just talk more broadly about your experience with the cultural challenges of implementing RPA. What have you seen in the field?
Yeah, I mean, any change is a challenge, right? Full stop. And if the more rapid the change, the more anxiety, the more, oh my gosh, how are we going to do this? Because many change regimens or programs in the past were all well thought out, well planned. We're going to execute this over, here's our 5-year plan. I mean, that doesn't exist, right? Technology is just coming in so fast. There's also a fascinating generational change as well. Again, we work with large enterprise, right? So we have people, still been there for their career, right? Maybe have pensions, although I don't know many people with those anymore. And in that mix, you have those folks, and then you have people fresh out of school, right? And every minute of every day is in some kind of technology, and they're so proficient with all of it, right? So you're seeing this spectrum of proficiency level. And I think those who are more proficient with, they're not technologists, right? They're not necessarily engineers or programmers, but they're users of technology and very proficient at it, right? They have far less anxiety. They're kind of saying, well, why? Where are the robots? Come on, hurry up. But so that dynamic is playing out as well. But you know, there's nothing I can say to stop the anxiety other than, you know, I'm obviously an older guy. I'm certainly not anxious about it. A lot of the folks I know aren't. You know, but as we go through, at least we have the models that I've been talking about. And I think we also have what I call those digital companies to learn from. I mean, not very often do you have a model of a solution just sitting there and you can observe it, and it's you know, Amazon, Google, Apple, go through all the digital companies. And then there's digital companies in every industry popping up and growing rapidly. I mean, there's a blueprint or a prototype for how to do it. Everything from organizational structure and roles and applying technology, right? And that can be applied right cross industry as well. So I think, you know, not knowing is probably the biggest worry, but again, look at these companies and you can see the future, you know, of your financial services company, of your insurance company, and so on.
Very good. Tony, unfortunately, our time is up. It's been a real pleasure to have you here and share your wisdom with us. Thank you so much for not only sharing that with us here, but really helping accelerate this industry for the benefit of all of us. So thank you so much for spending your time with us today.
It's great. My pleasure. And thank you all. Take care. Have a great day.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be ending the session soon, and the next session will start at the top of the hour. Please go back to any of your reminder emails received directly from the customer care at gotowebinar.com, and click the join webinar link again to rejoin the next session. We look forward to seeing you there. We'll relaunch that session 5 minutes before the hour. And that session, you do not want to miss the session. We're going to have the global head of the RPA and conversational AI from Nokia presenting to us on the proprietary AI algorithms for mobile networks. And it will be a fascinating presentation. And I hope to see all of you in a few minutes. When we close the session, there is a instead of closing the overall window for the webinar, if you close the session window, there will be a pop-up box that if you click on the close button, the blue button in that pop-up box, there will be a very short survey that comes up that asks you for feedback on this specific session. So if you could take a minute just to write a couple of things on that, we really appreciate your feedback. So thank you. We'll see you again in a few minutes.